Hey guys, Vitaly here today with Touch Life Studio, and today we're gonna talk about my 1 full year review with Nikon Z9. Now, I purchased this camera exactly 1 year ago. I got a call on February 9th of 2022 and from my local camera store, and they let me know that my Nikon Z9 was in stock and waiting for me. Now, I have never shared this upcoming little clip here, but this was my experience on my way to pick up Nikon Z9. You know, it's an interesting feeling to buy a camera of this caliber, because like I am having this buyer's remorse, even though I haven't purchased the camera yet, but in anticipation of doing that, you know, you're having this buyer's remorse that you're like, is it going to be worth it? Is it going to meet all my expectations that everybody talks about? Is it going to be that good that you feel like, okay, this is the best thing after sliced bread? And honestly, I don't know if you guys ever experienced having a buyer's remorse even though you haven't purchased something yet. This is what I'm going through right now, and you know, I guess you live and learn, so I'll be able to share more with you guys what happens subsequent to that. So buyer's remorse? No, absolutely zero. This camera is a powerhouse. This camera and its technology is something that I would refer to is ahead of its time. So in this past year, I shot a number of different events, starting with portraits, indoor and outdoor. I did a lot of in my studio work, and this camera is absolutely a beast when it comes to a studio camera. I've done celebrations and events. I took this camera on vacations. I've shot commercial interviews. I use this camera using on and off camera flash. I've shot a music video album cover. I use this camera for sports, for wildlife. I did product photography. I shot a ton of YouTube videos with this camera, which pretty much been a kind of a character and a main role that played a main role in my YouTube videos. And I've shot videos using 4K, 4K 120, 8K, ProRes, I mean, you name it. This is a true hybrid camera. Today I'm going to unveil to you guys my experience using this camera for 1 full year. So I would suggest that you grab a coffee, because we're going to be here for a while. There's a lot to cover with this camera, and I think you are here for a treat. So if you are new to my channel, I ask that you subscribe and give me a thumbs up if you found there's something valuable and interesting and educational in this video. So what I like and what I love about this Nikon Z9. So now I did a 6 months review, 6 months ago on this camera, and I covered a number of things that I learned, that I experienced, what I liked and I didn't like. Now, this review is not a repeat of that video, but rather an extension in things that I learned subsequent to other 6 months. And I think, and I hope that you found this information to be interesting and valuable. So let me just start with kind of cover basic things. Now, this is a 45 megapixel full frame stacked BSI CMOS sensor. In other words, this camera is loaded. It's loaded with technology, it's loaded with megapixels. It's literally plenty enough for anything that you might be thinking of doing, whether it's a product, whether it's sports, whether it's studio work. I mean, it's really loaded with a lot of things. Now, what do I think about image quality? I mean, image quality has never been better in Nikon Z9 cameras, and I really absolutely love it. It's very similar to what you find in previous Nikon DSLR cameras, especially those flagship cameras. This is what you find in this camera. Doing a number of shots The files are easy to work with. You're getting a great image quality, literally right out of the box, right out of the camera. You're getting what you want, and you can set different profiles here when it comes to the white balance or the images that you want to, you know, whatever you want to see, what it looks like right out of the camera. It's really fantastic. As far as the color renditions, the best in the industry. The best in the industry when it comes to color rendition, and you will not be disappointed. There's nobody who came to a Nikon system from other systems and said, oh, I really don't like Nikon colors. It is really the best in the industry, in my opinion. Now, the camera has what is called an EXPEED 7 image processor, and it feels like it's a future processor for other cameras. You know, based on, you know, using my previous cameras like a Nikon Z6 II, which actually happen to be recording me right now, Nikon manufacturer claims that this processor is 8 to 10 times faster than what we see in Nikon Z6 II and Nikon Z7 II. And I can truly affirm that the processor in this camera is really a light years ahead in the amount of data that it can process. There's no overheating with this camera when you're shooting in 4K and 8K. The camera shoots for 2 hours plus. Absolutely beautiful. Now, you may or may not know this camera does not have a mechanical shutter. It's an electronic shutter only camera, and which means in combination with the EXPEED 7 processor and 45 megapixel stacked BSI CMOS sensor, it delivers an outstanding images, and it works very well. Something that you will notice, the camera has what is called a sensor shield. And I mean, I demonstrate this camera on a number of my videos. You guys can just go to my channel and find where I talk about the sensor shield. I talk about how fast the sensor works, and I did a ton of demonstrations out there. So I'm not going to kind of go over in this video because it's just going to take too much time. Now, you know, the camera records 20 frames per second in continuous shooting in RAW, which is a lot. I think I usually never go this far, but I've tried for wildlife and I tried for sports, and it's almost virtually every single image is in focus. Now, as you know, the camera shoots at 60 frames per second at 19 megapixels. Basically, those are JPEG, and that's an ADX crop mode. And also, camera shoots at 120 frames per second at 11 megapixels. And also, those are also JPEGs. If you want to hear what it sounds like, let me demonstrate that to you right now. So this is the 20 frames per second. This is at 30 frames per second. This is at 60 frames per second. And this is at 120. So basically, once camera goes to 30, 60, and 120, the sound is virtually the same. There is no mechanical shutter here. It's only an electronic shutter. So that's why camera basically, you know, set to these kind of shutter counts and the speed and the sound. So between 30 frames per second and 120 frames per second, it sounds virtually the same. So I don't know whether this matters to you or not, but these are my observation. Now, as you know, the camera also shoots and pre-capture. It's basically what it does. It's a back-in-time buffer for 30, 60, and 120 frames per second. And basically, camera can pre-capture up to 1 second. So when you press your shutter speed just slightly, the camera starts buffering, and it's really great for those for the sports photography, maybe for like a baseball, or maybe for wildlife photography when maybe a bird is landing right on the water. These are great functions that this camera offers, and there are not many cameras out there that has this function. Now, so people ask me, what do I think about the low light autofocus with this camera? So the camera has something that's called a starlight mode, and I demonstrated this. I'm gonna actually link a video in the description below, just to you guys can have access to it and to see what this camera does in a low light situations. Basically, you can literally completely turn the lights off in the starlight mode in photo and video. This camera has some magic sauce in it, basically, that illuminates at night, and you can actually follow your eye. And I'm gonna put the video actually here on the screen right now, that you can see how amazing this camera follows your eye, basically human eye, in completely dark scenarios. Some people ask me, what do I think about the 2 card slots? So as you know, the camera provides a 2 card slots up here for the CF Express as well as the XQD card types. And these are 2 different basically card slots right here, cards I should say, CF Express, and this is CF Express. I'm sorry, this is CF Express and this is an XQD. And I would say, gotta be a little bit more careful. And I would say that both cards work great. I use them for photo and video. Now, XQD cards are slightly slower, so I suggest that you go with the CF Express cards, maybe 128 or even 256 gigabytes. If you're shooting video and you're gonna be shooting in RAW, which this camera does, RAW in video, and ProRes, I suggest that you go with a 512 gigabyte or maybe even 1 terabyte, because it's eating up space like a monster. So, but these are great cards. The transfer speed from the card reader onto your computer is absolutely lightning, and I love using these cards for that specific purpose. Now, some people might have complained a little bit about, you know, how difficult it is to open the camera door card slot, and I suggest, you know, I don't find this difficult at all. I don't know why some people complain about this one. To me, it's a good thing, because it's a fully weather sealed camera, and all I do is I press here, and with my one hand I just open it. It doesn't take a long time, so for me it's a plus that it's so difficult to open this one. You know, obviously if you're wearing gloves, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. You can actually have to press this button here and slide it down and open it, but it's really a piece of cake for me. So I really like this camera card slot door. Now let's talk about the battery itself. So battery that's being used here is EL18D, and this thing is phenomenal. It really is. It does so much good for you, and it holds your basically charge in camera, and depending on what you shoot, whether if you shoot photos and videos, you know, if you're shooting like a long events, even a wedding, it's gonna last you for the entire day. Yes, you might want to bring an extra battery just in case. Who knows what happens? Batteries do drain a little faster if it's a cold condition, but these these batteries last a long time. I went on vacation, and which was like a 5-day cruise vacation. This battery lasted me 3 days. Okay, and I was shooting all day long for photo and video. Obviously, I would turn the camera off from time to time, but it's fantastic. It's probably best in class battery. So it's EL18D, and I think it goes for about a couple $100 if you just want to buy it brand new. Now, I also talked already a little bit about the sensor shield, but just to mention, this is not a shutter. This is a sensor shield, and it helps you to protect your sensor when you're switching your lenses, let's say somewhere maybe in a dusty conditions, or maybe you're outdoors at the beach somewhere, and you want to make sure that there's no sand gets inside. Great addition to this Nikon Z9. There's no other cameras in Nikon system right now that offers a sensor shield. So this is the first one, and I anticipate any other future cameras that will come out, more like a flagship cameras, such as maybe Nikon Z8 perhaps, which I think will be a smaller body, will have a sensor shield as well, but let's wait and see. All right, so other people ask me, Vitaly, what do you think about the customization of the buttons? So the camera has 5 function buttons that you can customize. And again, I've done a number of videos on my channel where I talk about how to customize buttons for photo and video, and I think you'll find it very helpful. Please scroll down through my other videos on my channel, and you might want to take a look at it, how to set for portraits or how to set the function buttons for video. But I really love the fact that you have your function buttons right under your fingertips, and it's literally as easy as clicking on and off, whether you're in photo mode or if you're in the video mode. it does magic. Now, other people ask me about the illumination of the buttons and the back screen. Is it a gimmick? No, the answer is no. It's a nice addition to camera. Previous DSLR Nikon cameras had a similar function, and especially if you're shooting in a low light situation somewhere, or if you are shooting stars, and that actually very, very helpful to be able to access your menu buttons and any other function buttons that you need. I really like that as well. Now, one other small hiccup that I personally made before in the past, and it was my mistake, is, as you know, the camera can be charged, the battery can be charged with a USB-C port right back here. And I happen to use a wrong cable. Many of you have pointed out in the past, and I really appreciate you correcting me and giving me advice and direction what cable I should be using, which is a power delivery cable. The cable has to be rated for power delivery, but camera charges in battery inside, and if you have a power bank, and if you're going on a trip somewhere and you may not have access to a power outlet, I suggest that you bring a power bank and you can charge your camera right inside the battery, right inside. Now, the camera also has a full HDMI cable. I really like that addition as well, especially if you're shooting a video and maybe you're behind the camera, you're looking like this. The mini HDMI or micro HDMI cables, they tend to be very flimsy, but a full-size HDMI cable is really awesome to have. I probably am going to link one actually for you in the description below if you're looking to pick one up. I found one on, actually a couple on Amazon. Initially I bought a 3-foot cable, then I found it was a little bit too long, and I opted to get a 1.5-foot cable, and that one actually rated for 8K processing, basically, that if you want to again, there's no monitors right now that necessarily can show you in 8K, but it's a 8K rated cable. So I would suggest that you pick one up if you're looking for one cable. Now, one other interesting thing is the camera shoots at 132,000 of a second, and this is a pretty fast. My previous cameras usually would shoot at 1/8,000 of a second when it comes to shutter speed, but this camera does up to 132,000 of a second. And the time when you want to use this one, if you are in a very bright conditions and you might be using a hot speed sync, and I actually have done a video on that on my channel as well. If you're interested and you want to know how to set this up, please check that out. One thing I appreciate about Nikon cameras is that they have the on and off button right here. Okay, I know, for example, like a Canon R5 has a button on and off switch on the left side, and sometimes that can be a little bit not very ergonomic to use, especially if you are busy and if you are at some kind of event. But having to switch on and off this camera quickly with your index finger, it's actually, I love this function that Nikon provides. Okay, let's talk about the back LCD screen a little bit. So this is a touch screen. It's pretty sharp. It's not the sharpest screen on the market, but I gotta tell you, when it comes to image review, my clients love it. Sometimes when I'm taking pictures and I just want to show it to them in the back of a screen what it looks like, they go like, oh my goodness, wow, this is just amazing. And great quality. Again, not the sharpest LCD image, but in the industry currently, but it's a great screen for this camera. Now, as you know, the screen is not fully articulated. In other words, it doesn't flip back and forth, so that, you know, if you want to use it for vlogging, unfortunately, you not the best camera for that. But when it comes to, you know, switching like this, basically, right, you can see, or camera does something very funky. It does this kind of very awkward tilt, which I don't understand fully this design. I think Nikon could have done a little bit better job doing this, but I would suggest it's sufficient for portraiture and video work if you're behind the camera. Now, what I like about this camera is that when you holding camera vertically, okay, and from the ergonomic standpoint for portraiture, I love this. This is one of the probably best features of the Nikon Z9 camera, that you can shoot portraits vertically and the screen tilts like this. Now, other people ask me, what do I think as far as the customizing the camera and if I want to find some menus and some functions? Well, Nikon cameras, especially Z cameras, they offer what it's called an eye menu. Okay, it's right in the back of the screen. There's a little eye. You click on it, and then you have different options show up on your screen. And you can customize those options for photo and video separately, depending on what you want to use this camera for, from white balance to sound for video to eye tracking, which actually we're going to talk about very soon. And I really love this eye menu. And the thing is, when you switch from vertical or horizontal view down to vertical view, well, that eye menu actually is gonna flip with you and you can follow along. Very nice addition. I think this was done through the firmware update on the camera, and I'm glad that Nikon did that. One other thing that I love about the camera, and people ask me, well, how difficult or how easy is it to switch from, if you're a hybrid shooter and you want to go from a photo mode to a video mode? Well, in the back of the camera, there's a little switch right up here, okay? And this switch allows you to basically switch from photo to video seamlessly. And once you switch to photo or video, you press record and it does the job right away. There's no slowdown, there's no buffering. I know that some Sony cameras in the past, when you switch from one mode to another, because the camera is still writing to a card, well, with the CF Express cards and some of the functionalities and the super fast processor of the Nikon Z9, this is a fantastic feature, and if you're a hybrid shooter, you're gonna love this. All right, so let me talk a little bit about the extension of this camera for work, right? So I know many people who are switching from DSLRs, especially Nikon DSLRs, they still have a whole slew of the f-mount lenses, and which was the case for me, honestly. Now, when I purchased the camera, initially, I have also purchased the FTZ Adapter, okay? F-mount to Z cameras adapter, and it's really a little piece of plastic, really, and on one side it is an F-mount, on the other side it's a Z-mount, and this is a first version of the FTZ adapter because this one comes with a foot, and I believe there's a little motor inside. There's a second version of this camera that you can buy without this little foot. They redesigned the FTZ adapter actually to position the motor a little bit differently. But again, I don't mind this using FTZ adapter. Some people say that when you are in a vertical mode, if you're using this camera, and let me just position it here like this, that it creates a trouble for them holding. Now, my fingers are not super, you know, big or thick, so I'm okay with using the first version of the FTZ adapter. But some people who you know, might want to use gloves and they want to use f-mount lenses, and you might want to go for the version 2 of the FTZ adapter that does not have a little foot, you're not going to have this problem where your fingers are squeezed. So yeah, FTZ adapter is awesome. It works very well for photography. Maybe not as well for videography, although it's really not a major issue, except for the sound that f-mount lenses tend to make because of the motors in the lenses itself. With the Z lenses, it's a completely different thing, and I'm going to cover in this video further down if you want to scroll up when I'm talking about the Z lenses. All right, so let's talk about the stills photography, and especially shooting in RAW. If you're a professional, if you basically, you know, make money and this is your profession, you are most likely shooting in RAW. And it's likely if you're like a portrait photographer or wedding photographer. If you're a sports photographer, I'm not quite sure, because I know the speed is important and sometimes just getting pictures in JPEG is sufficient, but I'm not gonna claim that I know much about it. But if you're a portrait photographer, if you shoot weddings, you're most likely shooting RAW. Now, this camera shoots at 14-bit, all images straight out of the camera, okay? It does not have an MRAW or SRAW function, basically, to make your file smaller. Now, this is a 45 megapixel stacked BSI sensor, and so it produces pretty good size, pretty large size files. Now what Nikon have done, they actually created 3 different functions or 3 different settings, and the first one is lossless compressed. And when you shoot in lossless compressed, you get about 55 megabyte files. The second option, which I suggest that you use, the one that I personally use and I don't see any difference, is something that's called high efficiency star. And those files are about 33 megabytes per file. And Nikon uses Tico raw high efficiency compression algorithm. I'm not going to pretend I know what it is. It's some kind of a special sauce, but it has an amazing image quality when you try to compare with the lossless compressed and those 55 megabyte files versus 33. There is virtually almost no difference. Now, and the very last one is high efficiency. It's a 22 megabyte files. You can shoot as well in that mode, but I suggest that you use a high efficiency star, which is basically a second one down on the menu. Okay, now let's talk about video capabilities. Now this is truly a powerhouse. If you go onto Netflix website and you search for, or maybe online, what are the system requirements for cameras in order to be eligible for movies on Netflix, this camera is not mentioned there, but it has all specifications needed in order to be rated for Netflix. So the camera shoots at 4K 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second. The camera does 8K up to 30 frames per second and 8.3K up to 60 frames per second in RAW, which is a Nikon proprietary RAW file format or codec. So and I actually done a comparison. What are the file sizes when it comes to shooting in different frame rates and codecs? And actually it's one of my last videos. I'm gonna link it down in the description below as well for you if you want to check it out. But the 60 frames per second 8K 8.3K in RAW, it's absolutely crazy the file size difference between when you shoot for 60 seconds, basically for 1 minute, and you compare that with 4K 120 versus 8.3K in RAW, and it's absolutely mind-blowing the file sizes, what it does. So that's just information for you to know. If you're interested, please check out that video. Now the camera also shoots in 10-bit, as you know. It has a flat picture profile, which is great for basically like a YouTube videos, or if you're out and about somewhere and you're shooting some maybe music videos. For those purposes, shooting in a flat picture profile is a way to go. As you may know, there is no overheating on this camera. Basically, the camera shoots in ProRes HQ and ProRes RAW. There's no more 30-minute record limit. The camera basically can run up to 2 hours and plus, and recording in 8K, and which I don't know when would you be using it unless you're recording some kind of a concert. So I recorded this camera over 30 minutes and basically 4K 24 and 30 frames per second. Camera never gave me any kind of overheating warning at all. So fantastic. One of the firmware updates that this camera was given is the waveform. Again, having waveforms shown in the back of a monitor is absolutely fantastic if you're looking for exposure, especially for places and if you need faces and proper exposure. Waveforms is the industry standard in video. Great function. Something that was added with the Firmware 3.0, and it's called high-res zoom. And what it does, basically, you can actually utilize your prime lenses. Let's say it's f1.8, f1.2 lenses, and you can digitally zoom in. Basically, what it does, the camera actually crops from 8K to 4K, and now your prime lenses actually can serve and work as zoom lenses, and it is a crazy feature, and I really love the fact that Nikon is going beyond of what other camera manufacturers are doing today. So, and one of the mind-blowing away features is that camera records every single mode, every single codec and frame rate internally in the camera. You don't need to attach an external monitor to a camera like a Ninja V in order to record, you know, those NRAW, because if you have this crazy large capacity cards such as 512 gigabytes or maybe even 1 terabytes CF Express cards, that's actually going to be enough for you to record a lot of data. But again, the camera records everything internally, and you don't need to have an external monitor off to the side or maybe mounted on top of a camera, as it helps with weight. And also what I like about this camera is when you click the record button, okay, you can actually map your shutter button to record button, and it shows up in the back basically a red LCD on a red box on the LCD screen, just to visually indicate the camera is recording right now. Now this function is not found on other Z cameras right now to my knowledge, but you will find this on a Z9. I know other camera manufacturers offer a tally light. This is one of the things that I wish Nikon would have added to this camera, but nonetheless, it's great to have that kind of visual feedback that the camera is recording when you have this red box around your LCD screen. Okay, let's talk about the ISO. People have asked me, what do I think about the ISO? Is that a problem for 45 megapixel sensor? And the answer is absolutely no. The lowest ISO this camera goes to is 64, kind of the native, the base ISO for this camera, and it goes up to 25,600. And I've shot events in the low light conditions, and I get great images at about even 12,600 ISO. If I do portraits, I try to stick around and not to go over the 8,000 ISO. Yes, if you are pixel peeping, and as you know, usually noise hides in the shadows, I get that. But you know, for low light situations, even if you shoot at 8,000 ISO and you're not looking to print large images, the camera does a great job. Now let's talk about the Z mount lenses. And this is, if you want to take your camera to its full potential, if you're looking to really get the most out of this camera, Z mount lenses is a way to go. Now, in my personal experience, and thank you so much to all of my viewers who actually suggested in the past to me what next Z lens I should get, and I was kind of debating between 24-70 f2.8, or maybe should I go with like 70-200, and those lenses have its case use. So I have chosen to go with a 24-70 f2.8. Actually, that's the lens that's recording me right now on Nikon Z6 II, but I love using this lens 24-70 f2.8 on Nikon Z9. One thing that I will add, it does adds quite a bit of weight to a camera. So while it's one of the most versatile lenses, it's not probably my favorite lens to use because of the weight. Now, I got two my favorite lenses, and one of them is the 50 f1.8. I love this lens. I love this lens for travel. It does a lot for me. It has this nice thick kind of a focus ring that I personally actually set to an ISO. Believe it or not, I don't use the ISO on the camera as much, but I do set ISO as a kind of a mapped function button or function ring. Now with an with the 24-70 f2.8, there are different function buttons on the lens itself, and you can actually extend different functions for the camera through the lens or on the lens and use that lens for other things. And my other sort of a favorite lens to use, and I really love it, it's 85mm f1.8, and this is an S lens. Pretty much most of my lenses, Nikon lenses, are S lenses. They're very sharp. Now there are plenty of videos out there on the YouTube, they're comparing different lenses, but these two lenses, prime lenses, I really love using for my use cases as a portrait photographer. Now I have in the past used my 85mm f1.8 f lens, and obviously I've been using it on FTZ Adapter just to testing this out and comparing the f mount lens to the Z lens, and it works great, but like I said, for video, probably not the best lens to use. The 85mm does an amazing job. I know there's a 85 1.2 on the map right now, on the roadmap for Nikon, and I'm looking forward to get my hands on that lens when it comes out. All right, so let's talk about the EVF, electronic viewfinder. Now this is a 3.69 million dot OLED electronic viewfinder, and something that you need to know, it is absolutely blackout free. When Nikon Z6 II or Z7 came out, that one had a blackout screens when you take a picture. With the Z9, absolutely blackout free. If you're transitioning from the DSLR cameras, Nikon flagship cameras such as D6, D5, you're gonna love this function. You should not worry at all what it's gonna cause you any trouble. So now let's talk about the elephant in the room. How is the camera's IAF and face autofocus? So there's a number of videos, again, I've done on my channel how this camera works when it comes to IAF. But something that I do want to mention, it has 493 point phase detect IAF system. And the camera uses 9 subject autofocus recognitions. It's basically people, dogs, cats, birds, cars, motorcycles, trains, planes, bicycles. That's it. All right, so having those different functions, and for the most part I use for people. I've done on cats and dogs, I've done a little bit on automobiles, and it does a great job. Now the camera of course has a single point AF, which are all of us very familiar, but I do have to tell you that is a thing of the past. Okay, so what you want to do is, something the camera offers is use a 3D tracking. Use a 3D tracking, and this is absolutely amazing function on Nikon Z9. I had a great experience, and when I do photo shoots in my studio, when I do photo shoots outdoors, for the most part I stick to like 90% to 3D tracking. Something else that you can set the camera to is what is called dynamic area AF, basically for small, medium, and large objects. You can also use a wide area AF for small and large. Basically, you have a red box in the middle of the screen that you can adjust as you need to. And you can also customize AF boxes, right? So I think this is probably going to be helpful if you do certain sports photography or maybe wildlife, where you need exactly at certain moment in time take a picture for that specific maybe shallow depth of field, but has this kind of a customizable AF box size. So now let's talk about the camera IBIS, in-body image stabilization. So I've used this camera for up to 1/5 of a second, and I've been getting a pretty sharp images. So no concerns, because the camera uses a 5-axis sensor shift and basically stabilization. And once it's coupled with your Z-mount lenses, camera offers even better stabilization. So yes, the camera IBIS is spectacular for photography. Now I've used it a little bit for video. For the most part, a lot of my shots are stationary, so I don't have much to report on that. If you have experience using it for video in IBIS, please put it in the description below, because I know some of my viewers would love to know how this camera does in with IBIS when it comes to video. Now, camera also offers a great white balance straight out of the camera. It uses basically, when you shoot a JPEGs, obviously maybe it's not as much as important when it comes to shooting video. Now, when you shoot video, by the way, you might want to set your custom white balance because it helps. But when it comes to photography, the camera offers three different types. Basically, it's a A0, A1, and A2. A0, it reduces warm colors. For A1, it kind of keeps the overall atmosphere of the environment, and A2, it keeps warm light colors. So when you're shooting people's faces and skins, I think the A2 is a nice way to go because it adds in cameras this kind of a natural warmth feeling to the skin tones. So you might want to try that. Now, what other thing that I like about the Nikon Z9 is the over-the-air firmware upgrades. Now, I know that some camera manufacturers maybe struggle with it a little bit, but Z cameras, Nikon, they use a snap bridge. Basically, it's a wireless connectivity to update camera firmware, and I've done this with my Z6 II. I keep doing this with my Nikon Z9. And you don't really need a CF Express card to be able to download it, let's say from the computer first and then insert this in the camera. No, basically you have your phone, you download your app. Basically it's the Nikon Snap Bridge app, and you can update wirelessly via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi the firmware updates on Nikon Z9. Okay, so now let's talk about what I don't like about this camera, or maybe things that need some improvements. And I gotta tell you, it was hard for me to find things that I don't like. It's basically, I have to almost pull this out of the air in order to make this video worthwhile and mention something to you. But I did hear that some people complain that this camera could offer more given on what this camera has inside of it. And let me just tell you, so it would be nice if camera had a false colors for video. Now, monitors that we use, some of the even least expensive monitors have false colors built in them. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, could Nikon add false colors for video functions onto the display so that you can monitor your exposure, especially for faces? So Nikon, if you're listening, false colors, let us know. The second one is the weight of the camera. Now, the camera weighs 2.9 pounds. Yes, it's not the lightest camera, but given its ergonomics and how it's being designed for your hand grip, it almost doesn't feel like there's a 2.9 pounds. Now, once you start adding lenses, and especially those heavier lenses like 24-70 f2.8, yes, camera gets a little bit heavy, but it's the price that you pay knowing that you can record everything internally. And the way that the heat dissipates in this camera is not like any other cameras out in the market. So, but yes, so I would suggest, weight is one of the things. Now, I did mention earlier that the camera offers a pre-capture release, but that's only for JPEG files. So if you're looking to shoot in RAW, you cannot use this camera for the pre-capture release in RAW. So big deal, I don't know. Maybe it's a big deal for you, but if you're wondering whether this camera shoots in RAW when it comes to pre-capture, not yet. Maybe with the future firmware upgrades, Nikon will be able to let us do that. So, but we shall see. Now, there's no touch screen control when looking through the EVF. So if you're coming from a Canon system, specifically like a Canon R5, when you're looking through the EVF, okay, you can actually use your thumb to control your focus. So this camera does not offer that. Not a big deal for me for the most part. I use my joystick if I need to, which I think I find it pretty easy, and it's pretty handy because I don't actually have to put my finger in front of my cheek, in front of my eye, but I can use the little joystick to control that. So, and one other thing is, why don't we have zebra patterns for stills photography? Why is it only in video? So I know not many camera manufacturers even offer that, but I'm thinking having a zebra patterns for stills photography might help people to identify, okay, if there is if they are clipping exposure or not. So it's one of those things. And I don't know if it's a big deal for you or not. Why is the shutter sound is the same in different frame rates when it comes to 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and 120 frames per second? This is 30 frames per second again. This is 60 frames per second. This is 120 frames per second. So I really don't know, okay? But maybe that's something Nikon can change, and maybe give us a little bit of a nicer one of those D5, D6 kind of a shutters in this camera, shutter sounds. That would be awesome. And one thing just to cover with you is things that might be important to you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a fully articulating screen. It only does kind of a 90-degree, but it doesn't turn all the way. So if this is important to you, and maybe if you're a videographer and you need to, or maybe you're used to having a screen off to the side, you're not going to have this with the camera. However, I also recognize that many professional videographers who might want to use this camera, many of them used to using an external monitor because it's bigger, you can see more framing, you can see better exposure. So is it a drawback? It's not a drawback for me, but for you, it might be important. Okay, now guys, my final conclusions, basically the main takeaways. Do I have a buyer's remorse in getting this camera? Absolutely no. At $5,500, this camera exceeded its expectation in every possible way. Compared to other camera manufacturers such as Sony A1 or Canon R3, the value for the money that this camera offers is absolutely spectacular. Now, I think I can probably use this camera for next 5 to 7 years. I don't even know if this camera, when the next version of this camera comes out, such as Nikon Z9 Mark II, I don't know what that camera will have that will make me want to switch to the next model. I would agree, lenses may not be cheap, but if you want to get the most potential out of this camera, I would suggest that you start slowly switching to the Z lenses. Now, if budget is a problem, I highly suggest that you consider Nikon Z9 and continue using your f-mount lenses with an FTZ adapter. One of the things that I have to say to you is it actually gonna make your f-mount lenses function better than they function on your DSLRs for photography and for video. It will make your f-mount lenses function better on a Nikon Z9 than on your D6 or D500 or D5, okay? This is my experience and I sharing as it is. I'm not getting paid by Nikon to say these things. Now, this camera I feel like has unlocked possibilities for me I never had before. Now the question, did this camera make me a better photographer? Probably the answer is no, but it certainly made me a better videographer and better content creator. Now today I feel like I deliver more images to my clients than I've ever done in the past. At least it gives me that capacity to deliver more images. I can deliver twice as much, if not 3 times as much images, because how many pictures I take with this camera. Guys, if you found this video informative and educational, please consider subscribing. Give me a thumbs up. That tells me that you like the videos and allows me to make more content like this, more video like this for viewers like you. Once again, my name is Vitaly. Thanks for watching this 1-year review of Nikon Z9, and I will see you in the next video.